Hey everybody สวัสดีครับ Welcome to Beer Times Story, the platform where beer and brewing knowledge is shared. I miss this. It doesn't seem to be a bit too long, but I miss you guys already. Okay, for today's session, I bet we're gonna have a really good time, a really good burp, because I've prepared one of the, I would say, interesting topic in my mind, and to be communicate to all of us, because we're going to discuss about adapting European brewing technique knowledge in the making of delicious brew at one particular brewery in the USA. It may sound odd to think about applying European brewing techniques to brew the beers like American Pale Ale, IPA, and Hazy IPA, which I personally believe that our guest speaker for this session, at some point of his career, may encounter the same doubts. One interesting observation is that throughout time, he has a multiple trip to Europe, either for work or for pleasure. And regardless of that, the proof is in the glass, and his works always evolve into a much better shape and form. So to know whether am I right or wrong about this, let the man speak for himself. But before that, let me introduce him to you guys first. So he entered the brewing world as a hop chemist after his graduation back in 1993. Later on, he cut his teeth as a brewer at Goose Island Brewing Company for about 4 years from 1996 to 2000. Then his love of hoppy beers took him to the arena where it is known to be one of the best hoppy beer producers in the state, to the Wild West, California. And in 2001, his fate came across a considerable, relatively young microbrewery in Paso Robles, California, Central Coast, of course, which he eventually became a brewer there. Now, it is at this place that he began casting the brewing mantra, and the results are countless medals and awards from the Great American Beer Festival and World Beer Cups, throughout these years. So today he works at this brewery as the brewmaster, and the brewery name is Firestone Walker. So please welcome our guest speaker, Matt Bradusen, aka Merlin.
Hey, it's really wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. It's great to see you, and we're really glad to have you on. So, how are you doing? You are at the Mothership Brewery, right, at Paso Robles right now?
Yeah, I'm sitting in my office here in Paso Robles, and yeah, as you stated, it is the mothership for Firestone Walker. Uh,
Yes.
the greater share of our beer comes out of this brewery. Um, Although we do have kind of three brewing locations in California, Paso Robles is where we do almost all of the clean beer brewing in terms of everything that's going to be sent into production, cans, bottles, and draft beer. And the little bit that's exported would also come from this brewery for the most part. Then about 90 miles south in Buellton, California, still on the Central Coast, but relatively close to where we are now, is our wild beer brewery, what we call Barrel Works. And we kind of purposely kept that separate from this brewery because we're working with, mixed culture fermentation, Brettanomyces, and these types of things. It's very small production overall, but a lot of love and artistry goes into those beers. And then we have a very small kind of R&D brewery we affectionately call the Propagator. It's in Venice Beach, not so far from Santa Monica in LA. And, one of our veteran brewers, Sam Tierney's been with us for more than 10 years, is down there. We say he's got the best job in the business because he's able to experiment with anything he wants, virtually no cost spared to make innovation beers for mostly our pubs. We have 3 pubs here in California, but also to try to brainstorm and come up with new ideas for future beers that would come out of here. So.
Right. I saw several video clips and photos that were coming out from the Propagator, and it looks very interesting and kind of tasty at the same time, and all of the beers that you guys created over there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, by and large, being here in California, and part of this beer culture, we focus a lot on hop forward beers, and we've had a lot of success in competition and in the marketplace with pale ales and IPAs, whether they're hazy IPAs or West Coast IPAs, and so initially we were really focused on hoppy beers down there, but more recently we've got a bit of a lager fetish going on. We're brewing a lot of West Coast pills, but also traditional lagers. And Sam really loves kind of studying and replicating Czech style lager beers, a lot of decoction brewing, and using of heirloom varieties of grain. And yeah, you can go down a rabbit hole in any of these directions, and a lifetime of brewing there. So
I would agree. So yes, and are there any like particular interesting things happening at the Paso Robles? Like I saw you guys just released the XPA, the new form of pale ale over there, right?
yeah, I mean, it's, you know, you follow it as much as I do or anyone, in that, you know, a craft brewery is constantly having to innovate, kind of to stay, you know, to stay relevant, I suppose, but you know, also just to keep our fan base excited and kind of attentive to what we're doing. So it seems like every year there's a handful of new hoppy beers that come out. This year it's XBA, which is probably the one that's, you know, near and dearest to my heart, in that I love the pale ale format as a vehicle for hops. And it seems for a while now we haven't been brewing like a traditional pale ale. So getting back into that's been awesome. The XBA is a bit of a paying homage to the Southern Hemisphere, because we're leaning heavily on our experiences in Australia and New Zealand, and drawing from that hop region a lot. But I think we released at least three new West Coast style hoppy beers. So when I say West Coast style, you know, back to clear, back to some assertive bitterness, and back to a lot of hop aroma. So we've relaunched Luponic Distortion this year. There's a new Firestone IPA. Hopnosis is a relatively recent beer out in the world. So plenty of hoppy beers. But what's interesting is we're also playing in areas I said I would never touch. And I'll be the first one to admit, sometimes I make claims that I have to go back on my word. So we've been playing around with some fruited beers. And when we've always done fruited beers at the Barrel Works on the mixed fermentation side, more traditional Belgian inspired fruited beers, but we're also making some kind of, I don't know, I always call them throwbacks to the 90s. Like, you know, we have a blood orange beer that's doing really well right now. And it's hard for me to argue too much against it. And then we're playing a little bit in the non-alcoholic space too. So we're hoping to launch an NA here before the end of the year. So, you know, I'm all into learning new things and experimenting, but at the same time, you know, we're still deeply rooted into craft culture and making the kind of beers that, you know, the hardcore craft beer fan would appreciate still. So
right, understood. And just keep you going and having fun. You know, brewing is it's a good thing, right?
yeah, I mean, that's what it's all about. And I think we're just so blessed to have a fan base that has a wide, you know, palette of appeal, and willing to kind of go on this journey with us. Not to keep going too far off track here, but the other thing that's been happening since kind of our post-COVID activity has been a beer club. And you know, we for the longest time admired the local wineries here, because they oftentimes had, or almost all of them have, clubs where they're sending directly to their customers their product, and they have this direct relationship with their customers. And we started that this year, and most of the beer being sent out to the club that comes out of our barrel aging program. And you know, that's another really cool part of this brewery, is that we've been doing barrel aged beers for a long time. And again, we've been doing some crazy collaborations within our club beer program. I mean, we're just working on one now with Omnipolo out of Sweden. We've got a Frau Gruber beer that's coming out. They're from Germany. We've got a bunch of, we've worked with Side Project, and we've worked with, Monkish and the likes of those breweries as well. So it gets us an opportunity, because we're a relatively large craft brewery as craft breweries go. But it gets us an opportunity to interface with some of the really small, cool, innovative brewers. And the club is a perfect platform, and barrel aged beer is a perfect platform for that. Because again, you can, kind of throw caution to the wind. And if somebody wants to make a 40 Plato stout with graham crackers, you can go, okay, well, let's give it a try.
And is that kind of a preparation for the Firestone Invitational event? Because like you've been, working with various breweries, innovative breweries around the world, right?
Yeah, I mean, it is both an excuse and a reason. I mean, we bring all these great brewers in from around the world, and I just hate to not take advantage of the opportunity to make some beer with some of these guys and gals while they're in town. So yeah, we always plan a collaboration beer in and around the Invitational, and it's really convenient to do a barrel-aged beer because then we can allow it to rest for a year, and then when they come back the next year, we can taste it and release it. And again, it's just a great collaboration platform because you got plenty of time. There's not a huge time pressure piece put on it. And when we did I think it was one of the Side Project, and there was one other collab. Maybe it was Private Press. I can't remember now. But when they come in, we're like, "Hey, we want to age for 2 years." You're like, "Well, all right, let's do that." Patience.
And it's kind of like give them an excuse to come back to the event 2 years later, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's an excuse for me to go visit them and all sorts of things.
All right, Matt. Like before we're gonna dive into today's session, the meat and bone of it. There is one thing that I must ask you first, because at today's world, like mostly people are going to know your nickname as Merlin because of the magic, the witchcraft you cooking there at Paso Robles breweries. But I heard that back in the past you have another nickname in the brewing world, and it is Batman. What is that about? Like, can you just share the background with us?
Yeah, I mean, this is a little bit of a throwback to my early days working in the hops laboratory, because we worked a lot on light stable hop extracts and all sorts of nonsense that went into more industrial brewing. But I, not to make the story too long, I was getting maybe a little over the top in being detail oriented, but I was making our brewers dry hop at night, or at least after the sun had gone down, because we had large kind of passive solar panels in our cellar that allowed the cellar to be lit through these windows in the ceiling. And I didn't want the brewers climbing up there and exposing the beer, opening up the tank and exposing the beer to sunlight. So I passed a rule that we only dry hopped at night. And then when some other brewers came and visited us, like Vinny from Russian River and a couple guys from San Diego, and they heard this story, they're like, "Yeah, well, we're going to start calling you Batman because, your superpowers only work at night when you're dry hopping." So
That's great. So,
there's only a handful of brewers who still call me Batman. So that's
yeah, it's kind of cool. It's the expression of the love of hops and the concern of the design of the breweries to extract the best result to your beer, right?
Yes. And to finish that story, we got rid of the windows in the ceilings now, so we can dry hop during the day.
All right. But Batman is still there.
Yeah, but Batman is still here.
Still there. Okay. Now let's just get to the topic. So, I understand that before the past 2 to 3 years, you eventually had a chance to visit Europe before, but if I understand it correctly, the recent 2 or 3 years, you've been there, you exposing yourself to the brewing culture over there more extensively. And I think that the trip was heavily influenced by the relationship that Firestone Walker has with Duvel Morgoth, right? So the question is like, what drawn your attention wanting to go to Europe and explore, and the beer brewing scene and learn the practice over there in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, I mean, I feel like when you're a brewer, there's just this incredible pull and a great excuse to go to Europe, right? And so much of what craft beer has been tapped into since it all got rolling was European brewing traditions that we then kind of twisted and turned into wherever we're brewing, around the world now, but at first, in the United States. When Duvel bought majority share ownership of Firestone Walker in 2015, and these were the days where all sorts of different mergers and acquisitions were going on. There were big breweries buying little breweries. There were other little breweries buying into breweries. There was all sorts of different ways that could go. And I was just so thrilled that we decided to partner up with what I thought was quite possibly the most respected brewer in Belgium, and certainly a beer that I always held in really high regard in terms of Duvel, their flagship, and some of the other beers that they made. And I actually got to meet the brewmaster at that time, Hedwig Neven, probably 10 or 15 years prior to that through judging at World Beer Cup, and actually had become pretty good friends, and had traveled to Europe to visit him long before any of this was even a notion. And I guess just to give a little bit of background, part of the reason that we chose to partner up with another brewery was mainly because we had launched a beer in California called 805, which most of the rest of the world doesn't even, you have to almost travel to California to find that beer. But it's a beer that we launched in 2012. And by the time we got partnered up with Duvel in 2015, it had grown and doubled, and it was growing exponentially, and it had exhausted the kind of financial backing that we had internally in terms of being able to expand as fast as we needed to keep up with the growth of that beer. So, our reasonings weren't to get out of the business of making beer. Our reasonings were to find somebody who had decades of experience, had grown brands, and most importantly, from my perspective, had the brewing expertise to help us, grow the brewery and manage it in a really responsible way. And so anyway, when the deal finally was going down, I just said, hey, if this actually happens, promise me that I'll be able to come over to Belgium and spend some meaningful time with you guys and learn how you make beer, and really immerse myself into this whole brewing world, because I'd spent time in Germany, mostly at trade shows like the Brau, but I felt like I had developed relationships with at least German equipment manufacturers and some really great German brewers, and I felt like I had at least tapped into that world a little bit. I'd spent a fair amount of time in the UK and had a chance to brew at Marston's, where the original Burton Union is, and Shepherd Neame, one of the oldest breweries in the UK, and a few others, and also with some craft brewers in the UK as well. But I never really got deeply involved in the Belgian beer world. I learned later, at least, this is a story I tell, whether it's true or not, but the Belgian brewers are a little more guarded with their secrets, in my experience, than brewers of other cultures. And, that might just be my perception, but because once I got to know these guys, they opened up the doors and let me learn everything. But I always, the joke I always say is, like, a real Belgian brewer never tells you 100%. They always hold one very important secret back. So you'll never figure it out completely. But, and maybe they teach them that in school. I don't know. I haven't been to school in Belgium, but that picture that you had, I mean, is Sam de Belder, who is now the head of production. He's in the red shirt there.
Okay.
He took a lot of the responsibilities that Hedwig, who's still at Duvel, but now Hedwig's involved in innovation and focused really on future product building. And Sam is running the brewery as the director of brewing at Purs and for the other Belgian brewers. So I know he looks young, but he's a really sharp and experienced brewer. Yeah. So, and where that picture is taken is in the pilot brewery of Duvel Morgade, and they have a really advanced, really beautiful brewing kit there for test brewing. It's a 10 hectoliter kit. And in fact, when I was in Belgium staying for that, I was there for about 14 months over 2019, 2020. Obviously, COVID hit in the middle of all of that. And brewing being an essential food product, we got to keep operating the brewery, of course, but we had to be a little careful and sequester ourselves. So I sequestered myself in the pilot brewery, and I probably did more brews while I was in Belgium on that small brew kit than I had done in 3 or 4 years prior to that in Paso Robles, because I honestly don't go out on the kettles that often. I'm somewhat managing and overseeing raw material acquisition and recipes and everything like that. But my actual time on the brew kit's very minimal. So I actually spent probably more time pulling hose and turning brews on that short time I was in Belgium than I would normally. So I have a lot of fond memories. When I see that picture, it makes me think about all those brews. So.
Yeah. So there is the young guy, at the middle. That's the new brewer there, right?
So the guy in the middle, with the hat's me, and the guy with the guy in the red shirt is Sam de Belder, the new head of production. Yeah.
Okay, so that was in 2019 to 2020, like right in the middle of the pandemic, like what you mentioned. And this is the photo from Duvel, right? The thing that I understand is that there are plenty of breweries that is under Duvel umbrella in Belgium. So at least 3 or 4 of them, like Aschuf, Liefman, and Antwerp City, right? So you've been through all of these places, or just one particular places?
Yeah, I mean, one of the amazing things that happened that at first it kind of scared me, and then in the end it turned out to be a real blessing, is that when I arrived in Belgium, so I moved my family over, and I was going to just work full time in the brewery there. When I showed up, they didn't assign me to any specific they didn't really assign me to any specific brewery or any specific department. I kind of envisioned that I'd be put in the brew house and have to work alongside the other brewers, and I'd get put in the cellar and I'd be pulling hose, and it was kind of, back to brewing 101, only in a Belgian brewery. But in fact, Hedwig said, no, I want you to just float, and, we'll take on special projects as they come up. So I had somewhat free reign to visit all of these breweries that you mentioned in Belgium. And honestly, and beyond that, I got to visit the breweries outside of Belgium and in the rest of continental Europe that Duvel either owns or has partnerships in. So that was really amazing. So if I heard that there was a special brew going on at De Koning in Antwerp, I could spend the day there, and the brewers, opened the doors and really allowed me to kind of watch and see how that brewery worked. Aschuf is in the Ardennes, so it's a good 3 hours away from the mothership Duvel, but and in the French-speaking part of Belgium, and they're very focused on the Schoof beers, which are growing, rapidly in continental Europe. Still, I mean, they really have caught on in France and some other parts of Europe, and it's just a gorgeous brewery. And then Liefman's a really interesting brewery in that not only do they still do the open fermentation, mixed culture fermentation to make their, sour or acid, driven beers, but they do a lot of the fruit infusion for their version of Kriek. They do some really interesting kind of new age beverages, like they even make some kombucha there, and then they do the barrel aging program out of that brewery. So I actually got the opportunity to rack one vintage of Duvel barrel aged while I was there, and was able to kind of work on the floor and do some of that barrel activity. So not only was I there learning a lot from all these brewers, but I was also able to participate in some of the activities that I knew a little bit something about, barrel aging being one of them there.
Yeah. So, I mean, because these 3 breweries is in Belgium, and you say you've been to the other places, in the surrounding countries as well. And seems like just these 3, and including Duvel, it seems like they have like a different kind of beers, different process, different brew house, different characteristic. And when you say that you will put float, it seems to be maybe a bit too far out of the place, but it just say kind of give you an opportunity to just oversee all of this different practice, all from these different breweries, right? And I think it's a very, very good experience too.
Yeah. I mean, Duvel in general, Michel Morgat, the owner and CEO of the company, which is a multi-generational company, he just has this beautiful knack for and an attraction to beautiful beers. They don't call them craft beers; they more refer to them as specialty beers. And each one of these breweries has a really interesting story. And when Duvel got involved with them, rather than parcel them out and just kind of capture the brand and do that kind of activity, they've really put a special touch on each and every one of these breweries and turned it into something, kind of special for the next generation. I think, in terms of my takeaways, were a real respect for kind of their long thinking approach to and also just their absolute kind of commitment to these breweries once they get involved with them. My respect for the company was reinforced by the visit. And, I could tell an hour-long story on each and every one of these breweries, some of the crazy things I saw and experienced. But, Leafman's is just such a great example. I think that's so interesting because I don't know, when people visit Belgium, there's so many different breweries to see, but Leafman's still has these very large, over 100 hectoliter size open fermenters that are copper and open to the microflora.
Yeah. So I mean, say you spend a year there. I mean, of all those four breweries, Duvel, Arshoef, Leafman, and Antwerp, which one of it that you spend the most time over there?
I ended up spending the most time at the mothership, at the main Duvel brewery. That is the largest of all the breweries. They have the most diverse portfolio in terms of the number of beers that they produce. They have the most yeast strains that they're juggling. And it is by far when I say by far, I mean, they have a lot of what I would call modern technology, but very customized to the Belgian style beers that they're making because, in general, these Belgian specialty beers, if we're talking about the ale side of the programs, these are, old world top cropping yeasts being fermented in modern equipment. And so everything's been customized to allow for that yeast essentially to thrive. And Duvel is such a very specific and focused beer. So, the brewery was really developed around that beer first and foremost, but it has the flexibility to make the Marta Seuss Abbey style beers or the Vedette Lager and other type of beers. They do make dry hopped beers. So they've figured out how to do dry hopping in these very modern cylinder conical vessels. And they make Duvel, triple hop, and some of these other really great beers. And they do it so well. So there was a lot to learn there that probably I was able to apply the most to Firestone back at home because it was a more modern, familiar a brewery in that regard.
Right. Understood. And because you mentioned Duvel, right? And they are famous, for their strong blonde ale, right? 8.5% beautiful, gorgeous, clear Belgium ale. But what surprised me is that they also offer like what you mentioned, the hoppy beers like triple hop Citra. And I just wonder, do you have any influence on that beer, or it came before you?
That beer came before me, which is a testament to Hedwig and the rest of their team. Kind of forward thinking and paying attention. Like I mentioned, I met Hedwig at a World Beer Cup judging, and so he was paying attention to the U.S. craft scene, long before I had any influence on anything there. And Dimitri Stallings, who's their quality director, actually also has a small craft brewery on the side. So, he's constantly paying attention to mining, going to beer events, and learning about craft beer. So, and I think the leadership there, Michelle as well, is just really curious. And so here you have this like multi-generational brewery that's got this rock solid lineup of what you'd call traditional Belgian specialty beers, and yet they're always weaving in a West Coast IPA or some other type of barrel aged specialty beer, or like in the case of Triple Hop, a dry hop beer. So I will say that and I don't want to take more credit than I should, but in the time that I was there it was the time when Duvel 666, their most recent Duvel release, was formulated, and I was there for its initial launch. And so, I can say I had some influence there, and certainly was able to run the pilot batches. So I was responsible for the pilot batches on that small brew house.
Right.
And, so, it's so fun to go back to Belgium and see that beer, doing well in trade and be able to drink it, because I know the DNA of that beer for sure.
Well, it's always to go back there and taste the beer that has paid some your blood sweat over it, right?
Yeah.
All right, cool. So you spend about, let's say, 14 months over there, right? Away from home. You bring your family there, of course, and you work there. You've seen things. And what was it actually like, hitting the ground and brewing again? And say, okay, Duvel is kind of in the same realm as your Paso Robles breweries, right? But what about the other places? Are there a lot of differences?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about the other Duvel breweries and how they compare, I mean, each one of them is different for sure. I mean, in no particular order, Schoof, relatively modern brewery. That was a kind of an early craft beer in Belgium. I think it started probably in the 80s. So it's probably around the same age as a brewery like Sierra Nevada is in the United States. So, in many ways, they were a pioneer of craftier beers, I suppose, in Belgium, and represented a little bit of the rebellious side of the new beer world. But and this is from my American perspective more than it is from a Belgian perspective, it still to me is very steeped in classic Belgian brewing. Again, we're talking Belgian blonde ale. They did do Houblon Schoof, which is one of the first Belgian IPAs. So in that way, they were very innovative, but they still were using Belgian yeast and Belgian brewing techniques. So yeah, I mean, in that case, we're talking relatively similar technology and age, but very different yeast. And as a result, a very different process in terms of the fermentation and the flavor profile. These Belgian yeasts are so expressive in their esters and their phenolics. And I don't think that many U.S. craft brewers are deploying Belgian-style yeasts when they're thinking of hazy IPA or thinking of. I mean, there probably are some out there, but I'm just saying it's not your go-to. It's usually an English London 3 yeast, or it's exactly, or more, I would say like more clean pedestrian style, like Chico ale yeast or something, American ale yeast, but. I think, and then you go to De Koning, they had a mash filter. So there was some different technology there. And then Leafman's, I was trying to get into that a little bit earlier, is just completely other world. That's super old world, open fermentation. It feels like you're back in time when you step through that brewery and see kind of some of the implements still used to make these beautiful beers. So I don't know. I suppose I got home, and at one level there's this familiarity. I mean, I know how this brewery works, and then I had been exposed to all these interesting other ways of making beer, and I think maybe I came home. I'm maybe over regimented in my brewing process. I think I've always leaned heavily on science, leaned heavily on data collection, leaned heavily on making beers to style the way the original person who created this style intended it to be made. And Belgian brewers, to me, it's such an interesting fusion. There's this great adherence to brewing science, but they're not so
Straight.
worked up about styles. It's more about like, it's not even how you got to the end. It's all about the end product and the presentation of that product. They focus on the glassware that it's going into. They focus on the foam and the way that foam looks after you've been drinking the beer for a while. And ultimately, it's like, what kind of beer is it? They're like, it's a good beer. Do you like it? Drink it. It's like nobody's getting so hung up on style. So I think I came home and I felt a little freed from the regimented, World Beer Cup style guide, or, God bless Michael Jackson and all of his books that taught us beer style, but in some ways it over complicated what maybe just was good beer from some particular region of the world. So
right.
I think that's one of the take homes anyway. Yeah. If that makes sense.
It's more like expanding your, your room, make space for yourself a little bit, you can move a little bit more freely, right?
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, as much as I learned about making Belgian beer, at least here in California, there's just not a huge call for Belgian strong golden ale. Like, I think some people thought I was going to come home and start making a Duvel-like beer and, crack the code in California for Belgian beer drinking. And the reality is that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. Okay.
It's still here, but it hasn't gotten out there in the world yet. So.
Yeah. Well, I just have to wait and see. Maybe one day
you never know.
In near future, right? Okay. So a year passed. You came back home, right? So I'm just thinking, like, because you are always eager to learn and hunger to improve, the beer and brewing process of your practice. By picking the brain of European brewers, especially at Belgium's, in terms of knowledge, in terms of technique, practice, like what are the kind of the top things that blew your minds or knocked your sock off the most?
Well, I mean, there were so many, and it was almost like every brewery I stepped into, even if it wasn't a Duvel brewery, I had the chance to go through some amazing breweries, like traditional Trappist breweries like Westmalle. Some of the, traditional lambic producers like Cantillon or Old Bursel, and some of the more modern craft breweries, as well. So, I mean, I saw kind of a little bit of everything, and every one of those breweries I walked into, there was an aha moment, something like I maybe had learned in a book or saw, and then when you see it in person, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I get that. And not every one of those can be applied. I would say that Belgian yeasts, and there's so many, but in general are really interesting. And it probably took me working a little bit in a Belgian brewery and watching that to really truly appreciate not just this whole new flavor universe that they can provide, but also just how best to utilize and ferment with them. And sometimes it's let them do what they want to do and don't over control them, which is, again, that, a freeing moment. And there's just so much that can be done with just yeast, right? Really good base Pilsner malt and yeast. And Duvel's just this great example of that. I mean, that beer is so much about the yeast expression, and sometimes it's more about what it's not than what it really is. It's just this elegant, incredibly well fermented beer. So that definitely was a take home for me. I already talked about presentation. I think I did a couple interviews after I got home. Everybody was like, all right, so what are the secrets that you learned? Tell us what that secret trick in the magic bag of the Belgian brewers was. And I just said, foam. It's like they have such an incredible appreciation for presentation and how important foam. I tell this story that every year the De Koning Brewery in Antwerp has Bolika Day. Bolika is their best-selling beer. It's an amber Belgian beer. It's one of the beers that Fat Tire from New Belgium was riffing off of or inspired by when they came out with Fat Tire many, many years ago. Anyway, there's Bolika Day, and the brewery has a day where they give free beer. Anybody who comes into the town square gets a free beer. It's in the proper glass. There's a big cheers, and you drink your free beer and, celebrate Bolika. And I'm standing in line waiting for my free beer, and the the older gentleman in front of me got his beer and it didn't have any foam on it.
Right.
And he got extremely angry and, chewed out the bartender in Flemish about what a atrocity it was that he would even consider that a beer. And he sent it back. And then he got his beer with proper foam. I was like, it's a free beer, man. Like, you're going to complain about a free beer. And that's how passionate and how ingrained it is into the beer culture in Belgium.
Right.
That even that guy getting his free beer is expecting a good presentation with good foam. And I think, every brewer can be inspired by that. And it makes me think about my beers, how they're going to perform in trade, not just here in the brewery. Those were two of the main things. And I think also just that Belgian brewers in general across the board, I'm not generalizing for everybody because everybody's got a different brewing program, obviously, but I think they're much more open-minded to what we refer to as adjuncts or to other brewing aids or to, they've got a very deep well of resources in their toolbox that they're willing to deploy to get to this end product that's a beautiful thing. And not to pick on the Germans, but they're obviously very regimented with very few options. Reinheitsgebot brewing only allows you, this very few number of ingredients that you then have to use your brewing art to manipulate to get to the finished product.
Yeah.
So, I think that was another one that it's the proof is in the finished pudding, and you shouldn't be afraid to stretch a little bit to get there. There's a lot of talk amongst brewers now about downstream hop products, whether it's, Incognito or
Global One.
Yeah, exactly. Flowable hop products or top notes or all these types of things. And 5 years ago, I might've been like, well, I'd rather do it with the natural way. And I think my Belgian experience taught me that you should be open-minded to those things as well. There should be integrity in your beer, but you don't need to get too anal about how you got there.
Gotcha. And you also, have a chance to, work on different ingredients, because you mostly brew in US, going to be US ingredients. You play around with the Belgium yeast, Belgium hops, Belgium malts, and all kind of stuff, right? So that's kind of another experience too, because, different ingredients going to yield different result and probably need some different attention to, get the most out of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, by this time, there's a lot of Belgian brewers adopting American hop cultivars, but the Belgians always had these beautiful brewing sugars, candy sugars, and things like that are an integral part of, say, a Belgian quad, for instance. Spices, the use of coriander, orange peel, and other spices, and how they can be infused in such a way that you don't even really know they're there. They're just enhancing the overall beer experience. Belgian brewers are real artists when it comes to those types of steps. Another thing, and this is maybe Europe in general, but Belgium especially, a lot of beers are bottle conditioned. A lot of beers are expected to have a really strong and long shelf life. And here in the United States, at least in the craft beer world, we're a little spoiled. A lot of cold chain, short, direct to consumer, really short shelf life beers. Most of the traditional hazy IPA brewers are not expecting the customer to sit on a can for 6 months warm and for that beer to taste good. But in Belgium, it's a warm chain distribution world, and it's amazing how some of those beers can really hold up to it. So that was another take home as well.
Right. So they've been putting a lot of effort to brew the best beer and present it to the consumer, and expect for a long shelf life. Yep. There is one probably like small story, the short one, about you working on the Belgium malt. You try to imagine and try to convert it. You still remember that?
You do your homework really well. So and I really haven't gotten to the bottom of it, or I haven't taken the time to figure it all out. But there were a couple, well established, in other words, large maltsters doing Belgian pale and call it Belgian Pilsner style malts, very light color malts. Maybe they're just lower modification and relatively lower enzyme activity than probably some of the really hot malts coming out of the United States. The United States malting industry is still playing largely to American lager producers, and a lot of those are heavy adjunct beers. They have a lot of, corn, rice, or other adjunct that is free of any enzymatic activity. So the malting industry in general is producing pretty high enzymatic malt, and that might be just the simple answer there. But long and the short of it is, I would be mashing at early days on the pilot plant. I mashed a couple beers in, and you do the iodine test to make sure that you're completely converted. And this beer just would not get to the finish line. And I'm like, all right, we'll do a little bit longer time. And one of the older brewers that is really, kind of one of the guys who's been around the brewery for a long time, named Freddie, came in, and I said to him, I'm like, man, I'm having to extend this mash. He's like, you didn't do your 72C rest. We can't expect this thing to ever finish with that. We have never done that rest in my brewery in Paso Robles ever. Like, we've never had to do that. And sure enough, I went to 72 and ding. I was like, okay, Freddie was right. So, and as a result, if we use Dingemans Pilsner malt or Bort malt or one of these others from Belgium, we always add the 72
just to make sure. Yeah. Well, but that's like, because you've never expected the thing before you actually, put your hands on it. And once you learn it, you kind of set your benchmark of how to deal with it, right?
Yeah. And so there's the University of Leuven, KU Leuven, that is the bigger of the brewing schools. I think there's a few of them in Belgium, but there's a lot of brewers that came out of that program. And it is taught a little bit different than, brewers are taught at Weinsteffen, or brewers are taught at the Siebel Institute of Brewing Technology or Heriot-Watt or all these other major brewing universities. And I guess because I don't read in Flemish or French, I didn't get much exposure to either of the textbooks from those. I don't know what it was, but
most of us wouldn't be able to, read those things. Okay. We're coming, approaching the tail end of the session. So as a follow-up questions to what we discussed, you mentioned a lot about the takeaway home. So my question is, once you got back to Paso Robles, all the experience, all the things you're picking up, from those trips, does it shape the way Firestone Welker brew, and if it does, then can you give a bit of example?
Yeah, I think, I said earlier that maybe some folks were expecting I'd come home and Firestone was going to start firing off these Belgian-inspired beers, Belgian wit beer or Belgian, strong golden. And that just isn't the case. I think we really brew to what the, first and foremost, the Central Coast California beer drinker wants. And that's why 805 is so popular here. And then there's this larger love of, West Coast hoppy beers. And that's the major portion of our portfolio. And that's probably not going to change drastically anytime soon.
Right.
But I think, and I hope both myself and the other brewers here who've done some traveling abroad, I feel like anytime you travel, and it doesn't have to be to Belgium, I think anytime you travel and you commune with other brewers and you get an opportunity to taste their beers, you're going to come home and it's just going to add another layer to what you think about when you design beers. I mean, that's what I've learned to love so much about collaboration beers. And while I was in Belgium, I flew over to Thornbridge in the UK and did a collaboration beer. And there were some other collaborative type experiences that I had while I was over there. You always come home and it influences the way you think about that next beer that you make. Sometimes it's just a new raw material or a new malt or something that you didn't know about, or it's a little bit of a philosophical, thing.
Approach.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's there's no way it didn't influence what's going on here. It's just hard to really pin down what that exact piece is. So maybe it's just brewing open-mindedly, I guess.
Yeah. Well, but that kind of means a lot, right? Because it's gonna, if you communicate it well, it's gonna go through your brewing team too, right?
Yeah.
And you're gonna go into the same direction of pushing your beer into the next level.
Yeah. Well, and I think You know, if again, I use Sierra Nevada as one of these such, you know, almost perfect examples of when craft beer goes right, and it was because there was so much, you know, Ken Grossman and his team just really, really focused on getting the basics right. But they also spent time abroad and they deployed those technological advances. You know, there's a lot of great brewing equipment coming out of Germany and the UK and Belgium, and you know, they applied that to their program early on, to the point where it just became part of the DNA and fabric of that brewery, was to use best technology whenever possible. And it just, you know, it was like a rocket. It shot them out ahead of so many other brewers because they were really forward thinking, because they had spent the time to go out there in the world and harvest those ideas. So
Yeah, and you know, like Matt, during my study for this session, I always find myself realizing that whenever you're inspired by other people's beer or brewing ingredients, even, you know, it doesn't matter whether it's going to be in US or abroad, it is always end up, you know, being brewed at Firestone Walker and become the releasing of new awesome beers, which is kind of amazing for me. And it is also kind of inspired, you know, my brewing practice as well. You know, like implementing the step matching, implementing the layering, the dry hop techniques, but not, you know, dry hop in the dark. anyway, you know, the point is, from Firestone Walker beer portfolios, right? Can you share us some of the few examples of beers that were influenced by, you know, all of this thing that you pick up from the trip?
yeah, I mean, maybe not as much. Like, I don't know if you want the Belgian specific
In
influence.
general, I mean, just
Yeah, in general. I mean,
yeah.
almost every beer in the portfolio, I could tell you a story about who I visited and why I thought of that. You know, Pivo has the somewhat now famous story of visiting an Italian, you know, brewer in northern Italy, Agostino from Birrificio Italiano, and just being like having this aha moment that I always wanted to brew this German Pilsner. And then after I tasted that, it all came clear what I needed to do when I went home.
Right.
You know, looking at this picture, you have Easy Jack, and although we're not making that beer now, that was a beer that we went and did a harvest visit in Germany, and I was mostly there to look at traditional cultivars like Hallertau Mittelfrüh or Hallertau Tradition or Spalter Select, and then I was introduced to Hull Melon and Mandarina Bavaria, and Hallertau Blanc. And it just was like an aha moment after I rubbed and smelled those hops. And I'm like, I got to go home and make a beer with those. And, you know, the Mind Haze, the other beer that you have up there, that was, you know, we were in Germany for some other reason. It was probably the Brau, just going to a conference or a trade show. And I went to the Gutmann Brewery in the midst of being told 100 times over that I needed to start making hazy IPA, and it just wasn't quite there yet. And, you know, I have a Weizenbach in Germany, and I have an aha moment on hazy IPA. So, you know, if the theme of this interview is, you know, brew with an open mind, I guess all of those are somewhat examples of that I think you just need to be curious and get out there and taste beers, and the inspiration will come.
Right.
I mean, I know there are other brewers who probably stay sequestered in their brewery and they're just geniuses and they come up with all sorts of inspiration on their own, but I'm just not one of those brewers. I need to get out in the world. You know, and it's some of, you know, more recently, Billy's Beer Celebration in Antwerp and the Mikkeller Beer Festival in Copenhagen and our own Invitational are examples of, talk about concentrated inspiration. Like in the course of like a 3 or 4 hour session, your mind gets blown with inspiration. If only you can keep your wits about you and take some notes along the way. So
You get something out of that event for sure.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting, and I know that there are more, but this is like, say you went to Italy, right? You know, met the guy from Birrificio Italiano. I'm not sure I pronounced it right, but he introduced you in terms of a dry hop Pilsner, and then you kind of came across the Saphir hop, and then you implemented into your Pivo, right? and that is actually one of my favorite beer ever in terms of hoppy lagers. And and if you're gonna jump to the right just a little bit, the Mind Haze IPA. Like initially, when Firestone released it out, I had a chance to taste it, and it's kind of like, oh, this is super good. And then I came across your talk. You mentioned that you got an inspiration from an inspiration from Bavarian Hefeweizen beer producer, and I was like, what? How could this be, right? I was like, oh, really? And that is kind of open up another door for me to look into this aspect of brewing hazy beer with the mind of German brewers, and it's very inspiring. It's
Yeah, I
just like
mean, who brews hazy beer better for a longer period of time than the German, Bavarian Hefeweizen brewers? But yeah, and I guess, in the end, it's like that cross-pollination is just inevitable. And I think there might be a couple wrong answers. There's two things that don't go well together, but it's always amazing, again, with an open mind, how you can kind of, cross these things up. I mean, hops is the perfect example. There's a million wonderful combinations that you can have there. And with a little bit of patience and a few practice brews, you can come up with some very unique and interesting aromas and flavors there. So, yeah.
And I understand that this beer are not like overnight attempt. You're gonna have to just do trial and errors to try to extract or boil the best of it out and put in the package to consumer, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's probably you have one advantage too, because you have the propagator. So Sam can play around with things and with your ideas, implement it together, and you're gonna cook up some more of this delicious brew.
Yeah, I mean, when Firestone first started out, we didn't have a pilot brewery, and maybe they were simpler times. I mean, I think we had fewer beers in the portfolio, and we had more time to just kind of refine them. One at a time. But now with this kind of more rapid fire innovation that's going on in craft beer, I think we'd be hard pressed to get these beers right without having a pilot brewery and someone focused on, trying to get those beers right in time for launch and everything else that comes in between. So, plenty to be inspired by still in craft beer after all these years.
Of course. Yeah. And, just a little bit off the topic, maybe not too far off here, but the quick one is that not only that Firestone Walker and you are the kind of the early adopters of hop cultivars from, Central Europe, right? You're also the early adopter of the, Southern Hemisphere one too, from New Zealand, from Australia. And I still remember the time that I had the Luponic Distortion from you guys, and it's kind of like, whoa, what is this? And it's kind of like what I say, you always try to push things to the next level, to turn the knob to 11, and it's really inspiring.
Yeah, I mean, you can't go to the Southern Hemisphere and visit hop farmers and not be inspired. I mean, it is just such an amazing part of the world for hop growing. And it's getting better. That's the other part of it too. It's I think that now that enough brewers have been turned on to Southern Hemisphere hops, and that it's this positive feedback loop, and now those growers are really kind of in the zone, and that's what's basically happened in the United States. A decade or more before that. Same thing. It's not that long ago when Citra and Amarillo were the new cool hops. And now now it's just a dizzying array of new cultivars available, and it's almost hard to keep up with it. And the growers and the breeders and everybody's in the zone. So it's an amazing time to be a brewer and a beer lover, because there's just so many great raw materials out there at our disposal. Just not enough time to make all the beers.
Right. 100%. Yeah. Okay. Excellent, Matt. I think we are, at the finish line for the session. Do you have any final says about the topics we discussed? Adapting European brewing techniques to the brew of good beer. You have any add-on?
Yeah, I don't think I have anything more to add. I think we covered it pretty well. It was a great interview. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for your time. We truly appreciate it, and it's kind of good that we kind of you share your stories and also inspire me, like inspire and re-inspire me again.
Awesome.
That's
Well, you did a
great.
good job. You really you did a good job researching it. So I'm really impressed. Nice work.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And like what I said, you inspire me in a lot of ways. Not in terms of the brewing scene itself, but the appreciation over the materials, the ingredients and the process and the people and the culture. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to, if possible, see you in person somehow, maybe in Paso Robles.
Do you end up traveling to California or to the United States for craft beer or anything else on any regular basis?
Yes, but not that often. Maybe like once every 2 years or so.
Okay.
Yeah. But maybe the Firestone Walker Invitation 2026, I'll try to be there.
Yeah, let us know. Love to have you.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Great.
All right.
Well, nice
Great.
job. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you very much. And in the meantime, take care and keep putting all the great witchcraft over there. Okay. We'll wait for your beer, because I think we have distributors import Firestone Walker beer to our country too.
Yeah, I hope it's in good shape. It's a long ways from home, of course.
Yeah.
So
I understand. It's always good to taste from the source.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you very much, Matt, and you
All
have
right.
a good day.
Yeah. You take care as well. Thank you.
Bye. Yeah. Thank you. Bye. Okay. Here you go. You heard from the man himself what he picked up from his journey to Europe. Even though it is based on not too long, but not too much of the time he spent there, but a year is still considered to be a hefty amount of time to learn, and you see that he always get inspired by even small things like foam. Who would even think that it's going to be the thing that you should refocus as a brewers, and you see that there are many beers that Matt kind of innovated with his team to put out the delicious beer for consumer that's hit the mark of his breweries. In this case is Firestone Walker. And though if you're going to ask me for one thing to take away from this episode, is that keep looking for things that gonna reignite the eager of you to learn, and that is always good to hunger for learning new things and applying it to your brewing practice, your brewing process, to achieve the best result out of it is going to keep things relevant, keep brewing a good beer, and keep putting exciting things out there for yourself and for other beer drinkers, beer appreciator. Yeah. So I guess that is all for today session. So this is a goodbye, but we will be back in maybe the next week or two or so. But in the meantime, keep drinking good beers and stay tuned. Bye, everyone. Cheers. สวัสดีครับ